I used to love the smell of cut grass. You know the scent? That sharp, green, chemical tang that hits you on a Saturday morning when the whole neighborhood is out mowing their lawns. It used to smell like productivity, like order, like man taming the wild, one strip of suburbia at a time. Now, that smell makes me want to vomit. Actually, it makes me want to put a bullet in my head, because if I can smell it, that means the filtration system has failed, and I have about 3 minutes before the spores paralyze my diaphragm. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I need to get this down. I need to explain how the world ended. It didn't happen with fire. It didn't happen with riots, or bombs, or the dead rising from graves. It happened on a Thursday. A humid, miserable, sticky Thursday in July. I was in the kitchen. I remember the time exactly. 1:14 p.m. I was staring at the thermostat on the wall. It read 98 degrees inside the house, even with the AC rattling its bolts loose trying to keep up. I'd moved out here to the valley to get away from the city heat, to fix up my grandfather's old A-frame cabin, get some peace and quiet. The joke was on me. The heat wave had settled over the valley like a heavy wool blanket 3 days ago and just refused to move. I had a glass of ice water in my hand. The condensation was dripping onto my bare foot. I was just standing there, too hot to think, too hot to work on the blueprints spread out on the dining table. That's when I noticed the light change. It wasn't a cloud passing over the sun. It was more like a filter. Everything outside the kitchen window suddenly took on this sickly, jaundiced tint. Yellow, but not a sunny, happy yellow. It was the color of an old bruise, the color of bile. I walked to the sliding glass door that led out to the back deck. My hand hovered over the handle. The glass was hot to the touch, radiating heat like a furnace door. Outside, the air was thick, visibly thick. There was this dust drifting down. At first, I thought it was ash. We get wildfires out here sometimes, and the wind can carry ash for miles. But this wasn't gray or black. It was gold. A heavy, glittering gold dust falling straight down, coating the deck railing, the barbecue grill, the old oak tree in the center of the yard. It was beautiful for about 10 seconds. Then I saw Mr. Gable's next door. My property is separated from his by a chain-link fence that's been leaning over for 20 years, half swallowed by ivy. Gables was a retiree, one of those guys who treated his garden like a military operation. He was out there in his wide-brimmed hat, kneeling in his vegetable patch. I remember thinking, "Old man, get inside. It's 104 degrees out there. You're going to have a stroke." I unlocked the sliding door. The seal broke with a hiss. Immediately, the smell hit me. It wasn't smoke. It was sweet, cloyingly sweet, like honey left out in the sun until it starts to ferment, like rotting peaches and jasmine perfume mixed together. It was so strong it made my eyes water instantly. I coughed, tasting sugar on the back of my throat. "Hey, Mr. Gables!" I shouted. My voice sounded flat. The air was so heavy it felt like it was eating the sound. He didn't look up. He was hunched over his prize-winning tomatoes. "Gables, you seeing this?" I stepped out onto the deck. The yellow dust settled on my skin immediately. It felt oily, greasy. I wiped my arm, leaving a smear on my skin, and that's when I heard the sound. You know the sound of Rice Krispies? That snap, crackle, pop when you pour the milk in? Imagine that, but louder, wet, continuous. It was coming from everywhere, from the trees, from the grass, from the flower beds. Crackle, snap, Squish. I walked to the railing. "Mr. Gables?" The old man stood up then. But he stood up wrong. He didn't use his hands to push off his knees. He was pulled up, jerked upright like a marionette. He turned toward me. He wasn't wearing his glasses. His eyes were wide, staring at nothing, and there was something green coming out of his mouth. At first, I thought he was vomiting. I thought, okay, heat stroke. He's sick. Then the green thing moved. It wasn't bile. It was a vine. A tendril, thick as my thumb, pale green and glistening with slime. It pushed past his lips, curling down his chin, exploring the air like a snake. I froze. My brain just stopped processing. It was too absurd. It was impossible. Mr. Gables raised a hand toward me. Or he tried to. His arm got halfway up, and then stopped. He looked down at his chest. The tomato plants. The tomato plants he had spent all spring pruning and tying to stakes. They were moving, and I don't mean swaying in the wind. There was no wind. They were uncoiling. The thick, fuzzy stalks were undulating, wrapping around his legs, his waist. As I watched, a tomato the size of a softball ripened in seconds. It went from green to red to bursting, splitting open with a wet pop. But seeds didn't come out. Spores did. A puff of red smoke hit Gables in the face. He didn't scream. He just went slack. His knees buckled, but he didn't fall because the vines had him now. They were tightening. I could hear the fabric of his flannel shirt tearing. I could hear the wet crunch of the stalks tightening against his old bones. "Help!" he whispered. It was barely a sound. The vine in his mouth pulsed, shoving itself deeper down his throat. That broke the spell. Jesus Christ! I scrambled back, slipping on the oily yellow dust covering my deck planks. I grabbed the door handle and slammed the slider shut. I locked it. Then I threw the safety latch. I backed away into the kitchen, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I wiped my mouth, spitting. The sweet taste was still there. I looked out the glass. Gables was gone. Well, he wasn't gone. He was just covered. The tomato plants had surged upward, interweaving with the ivy from the fence. In the span of 30 seconds, they had formed a cocoon, a mound of writhing green vegetation where a man used to be. And it wasn't stopping. I ran to the front window. The living room looks out over the driveway and the street. The oak tree in the front yard, the one that had been there for 80 years, was shedding its leaves. All of them. They were raining down in a brown curtain. But new things were growing in their place. Not leaves. Thorns. Long, black spikes were erupting from the bark, shooting out like switchblades. The grass on the lawn was shooting up, visible to the naked eye. 1 inch. 2 inches. 3 inches. It looked like a time-lapse video you see on a nature documentary, but it was happening in real time. A car came careening down the street. It was Mrs. Miller's sedan. She was swerving, her wipers going furiously to clear the yellow dust. She didn't make it. She hit the curb right in front of my house. The car bounced, slammed into the streetlight, and stopped. The horn started blaring. A continuous, long wail. I grabbed my phone from the counter. No signal. Of course. I ran to the front door. I had to help her. I had to do something. I unlocked the deadbolt and threw the door open. The heat hit me again, hotter than before. And the sound. The crackling was deafening now. It sounded like a bonfire. I took one step onto the porch and stopped. The driveway was gone. The asphalt had cracked, shattered by dandelions. But these weren't dandelions. They were the size of sunflowers, with jagged, saw-toothed petals and centers that pulsed with a rhythmic, wet beat. They had punched through 4 inches of blacktop in minutes. Mrs. Miller's car was 20 feet away. She was trying to open the door. She pushed it open, stumbling out onto the pavement. She was coughing, hacking up that same clear slime. "Don't touch the grass!" I screamed at her. "Stay on the pavement." She looked at me, eyes wild, red-rimmed. "My throat," she rasped. "It burns." She took a step toward me, and her heel caught in a crack in the road. She fell. Her hand landed on the grass strip between the sidewalk and the street. The grass reacted instantly. It didn't just wrap around her. It bit her. The blades of grass were serrated. They sliced into her palm. She screamed then, a high, thin shriek that cut through the humid air. "Get up!" I yelled, looking around for a weapon, a stick, anything. But the grass was pulling. It was impossibly strong. It dragged her arm down, pinning it to the earth. And then the roots came. I watched, paralyzed with horror, as white, thread-like roots burst from the soil around her hand. They didn't go over her skin. They went into it. They pierced her pores, burrowing into her flesh like needles. She screamed again, but it was cut short as a dandelion, one of those mutated giants, snapped its head forward and clamped onto her face. I slammed the door. I couldn't watch. I couldn't do anything. I locked it. Deadbolt. Chain. Then I dragged the heavy oak coat rack in front of it, as if that would help. I backed into the living room, hyperventilating. My hands were shaking so bad I couldn't get a grip on my own shirt. Think. Elias. Think. The windows. I ran around the first floor. Kitchen, living room, dining room, study. I checked every latch. I made sure they were tight. In the kitchen, I looked out the back again. The deck was disappearing. The ivy from the fence, the stuff that had eaten gables, had jumped the gap. It was crawling across the floorboards of the deck. It was moving fast, like a spilled drink spreading across a table. It reached the glass door. I watched, mesmerized and terrified, as a vine pressed against the glass. It had little suction cups, like an octopus. It stuck to the glass, then curled upward. Then another, and another. They were looking for a way in. I could feel it. It wasn't just random growth. It felt directed. It felt hungry. I went to the sink to splash water on my face, to try and wake up from this nightmare. I turned the handle. Nothing came out. Then a sputtering sound. A glob of brown sludge fell into the sink. Then a twig. Then silence. The pipes. The roots had gotten into the mains. I checked the lights. They flickered, buzzed, and stayed on. For now. I needed to see what was happening on the news. I ran to the living room and turned on the TV. Static. "Come on," I whispered, hitting the side of the set. "Come on." The image jumped, stabilized. It was the local news station. The anchor, a guy I'd watched every morning for years, looked terrified. He wasn't sitting at the desk. He was standing, looking off camera. Behind him, through the studio window, I could see green. Vines were hanging from the studio lights inside the room. "Stay indoors," he was saying, his voice trembling. "Do not attempt to leave the area. The spores are. They are accelerating the biological breakdown of." He stopped, listening to something in his earpiece. Oh God! There, in the ventilation. The screen went black. I sat there on the floor, the remote slipping from my sweaty hand. The silence in the house was heavy, but outside, the world was loud. The crackling had changed. It was deeper now, a grinding sound, like stones being crushed together. I looked at the window again. The light was failing, not because it was night, it was only 2 p.m., but because the house was being buried. The ivy had reached the top of the sliding glass door. The kitchen was plunged into a green twilight. I needed supplies. If the water was gone, I needed whatever I had left. I scrambled up and ran to the pantry. I was manic now. Survival mode had kicked in, riding mostly on adrenaline and terror. I grabbed everything. Cans of soup, a box of crackers, peanut butter, 3 bottles of lukewarm water I'd left on the counter. I threw them into a laundry basket. I needed a weapon. I ran to the garage door. I hesitated. The garage wasn't insulated as well as the house. There were gaps under the big rolling door. I put my ear against the door leading to the garage. I could hear it. A scratching sound. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Like rats inside the walls. "Don't go in there," a voice in my head whispered. "It's already compromised." I backed away. I grabbed a heavy cast-iron skillet from the stove. It felt ridiculous in my hand, but it was heavy. It was solid. I took the laundry basket of food and the skillet and went upstairs. The second floor. High ground. My bedroom had a view of the valley. Or it used to. I dropped the basket on the bed and walked to the window. The devastation was absolute. The entire neighborhood was gone. The houses were there, but they were just mounds under a carpet of pulsating, vibrant green. The telephone poles were snapped like toothpicks, dragged down by the weight of the vines. And the pollen. The yellow dust was so thick now it looked like fog. It swirled in the streets, drifting in currents. I saw movement down below. 3 houses down, the Keller's place. Their roof was caved in. I saw someone on the lawn. It was a teenager. I didn't recognize him. He was stumbling through the waist-high grass. He had a baseball bat in his hand. He was swinging it wildly, screaming words I couldn't hear. He took a step, and the grass parted, not to let him through, but to trip him. A root, thick as a fire hose, erupted from the ground and wrapped around his ankle. He went down hard. I watched through the glass, my knuckles white on the windowsill. He tried to sit up, hacking at the root with the bat. It didn't do anything. The wood just bounced off the rubbery bark. Then the flowers turned toward him. All across the lawn, these massive, trumpet-shaped flowers, bright purple and blue, swiveled their heads. They looked like gramophones. They opened. A cloud of glittery dust shot out of them, right into his face. He stopped fighting instantly. He dropped the bat. He sat there in the grip of the root, and he smiled. He just slumped back, his head lolling to the side, a dreamy, drugged expression on his face. And then the grass began to eat him. It flowed over his legs, his chest, his face. In seconds, he was just another lump in the green landscape. I backed away from the window, pulling the curtains shut. My hands were shaking so bad I almost ripped the fabric. I sat on the edge of the bed. It was dark in the room now. The only light came from the digital clock on the nightstand. 2:45 p.m. The house groaned. A deep, wooden groan. The pressure, the weight of the growth outside was pushing on the structure. I needed to secure the room. I grabbed a roll of duct tape from my desk drawer. I'd been using it to label boxes for the renovation. I went to the window and taped the seams. Every crack. Every gap where the glass met the frame. I could smell it, though. Faintly. That sweet, rotting perfume. It was seeping in. I went to the bathroom attached to the bedroom. I filled the bathtub with the last dribble of water that came out of the tap. It was brown and smelled metallic, but it was water. I taped the bathroom vent. I taped the gap under the bedroom door. I created a seal, a bubble. I sat in the corner of the room, the cast-iron skillet on my lap, the laundry basket of food next to me, and I listened. The sounds outside were changing. The frantic crackling of rapid growth had slowed down to a steady, rhythmic thrumming. But now there was something else. A tapping. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the window glass. Behind the curtain. I didn't want to look. God, I didn't want to look. But I had to know. I crawled across the floor. I reached up and pulled back the edge of the curtain just an inch. A vine was pressed against the glass. But it wasn't just a vine. It had a face. It looked like a mimicry of a human face, formed out of knotted wood and leaves. It had holes for eyes and a gash for a mouth. And inside that wooden mouth, I saw something that made my blood freeze. It had teeth. Human teeth. They weren't grown. They were harvested. It tapped against the glass with a thorn, gentle, testing the strength of the barrier. I let the curtain fall. I scrambled back to the corner, hyperventilating, clutching the skillet to my chest. The sun went down, I think. It was hard to tell. The green twilight just faded into blackness. I sat there in the dark. The air in the room was getting hot and stale. I tried to control my breathing. Conserve oxygen. Don't panic. Sometime around midnight, the singing started. It wasn't human singing. It was a low, vibrational hum that seemed to come from the walls themselves. It was beautiful and terrifying. It sounded like a choir of wind instruments, rising and falling. It made me feel sleepy. It made me feel like opening the window would be a good idea. Like maybe it wasn't so bad out there. Like maybe I should just go lay down in the grass and rest. I dug my fingernails into my palm until I felt blood. Pain. Focus on the pain. Don't listen, I whispered to myself. Don't listen. I put my hands over my ears, but the sound vibrated through the floorboards, through my bones. Come out. The walls seemed to hum. Come out and grow. I grabbed the duct tape. I tore off 2 pieces and taped them over my ears. It didn't stop the sound, but it muffled it enough that I could think. I checked my phone again. 3% battery. No signal. I opened the Notes app. I typed, "My name is Elias Vance. If you find this, don't touch the plants. Don't breathe the air. Fire helps. I think fire helps." I stared at the screen until it went black. I was alone, trapped in a wooden box that was slowly being crushed by a forest that wanted to eat me. And then, from downstairs, I heard the sound I had been dreading most of all, the sound of glass breaking, and then the heavy, wet sound of something dragging itself across the hardwood floor of the living room. I gripped the skillet. I stared at the taped-up door of my bedroom. "Part 1, I whispered to the dark. "This is just part 1. I didn't breathe. I couldn't. You know that silence that falls over a house at 3 a.m.? That heavy, pressurized quiet where you can hear the refrigerator humming 3 rooms away? That was gone. The house was alive. And I don't mean that metaphorically. The wood frame was groaning, a low, constant stress creak like a ship taking on water. But underneath that was the sound from downstairs. Slap, drag, squelch. It sounded like wet laundry being pulled across the floorboards. I sat there in the corner of my bedroom, clutching that cast-iron skillet until my knuckles turned white. The duct tape over my ears muffled the sound, but I could feel the vibrations in the floor. Thump. Drehwag. Thump. Drehwag. It was moving from the living room toward the kitchen. I had a choice. Stay here, blind and deaf in my little taped-up box, and wait for whatever that was to find me. Or go look. The architect in me, the part of my brain that understands structures and layouts, was screaming that the house was compromised. If the glass was broken downstairs, the spores were in. The yellow mist, as I'd started calling it in my head, was circulating through the HVAC returns. If I stayed in this room, eventually the air here would turn too. I stood up. My knees popped. The sound was like a gunshot in the small room. I froze, waiting for the dragging sound to stop, waiting for a reaction. It didn't stop. Slap. Drag. I moved to the bedroom door. I peeled the tape back slowly. It made a tearing sound that set my teeth on edge, but I had to do it. I unlocked the door. The handle was warm. Not hot, but warm, like holding a mug of coffee that's been sitting out for 20 minutes. I turned it and pulled. The smell hit me first. It was distinct from the outside smell. Outside smelled like rotting fruit and sugar. The hallway smelled like earth, deep, black, potting soil, and ozone. You know the smell of a thunderstorm? That sharp, electric scent? It was mixed with the dirt. I stepped out onto the landing. The hallway was dark, but not pitch black. There was a faint, bioluminescent glow coming from the floorboards. I squinted. Moss. A carpet of glowing, pale blue moss had sprouted along the baseboards. It was pulsing, dimming and brightening in a rhythm that matched my own heartbeat. Thump, thump. Thump, thump. I looked at the wallpaper, that awful floral print my grandfather had put up in the 70s. It was bulging. The drywall underneath was wet. I could see dark stains spreading like bruises behind the paper. Roots. The roots were inside the walls, drinking the moisture from the plaster. I crept toward the stairs. I made myself light. I walked on the balls of my feet, stepping over the squeaky board on the third step that I'd been meaning to fix for months. I reached the railing and looked down into the foyer. The front door was still barricaded with the coat rack. But the living room. The moonlight was filtering in through the front window, but the light was wrong. It was filtered through the layers of ivy covering the glass outside. It cast everything in a sickly, underwater green. And there, in the center of the living room rug, was the intruder. It wasn't a person. Not anymore. It was shaped like a man. It had 2 legs, 2 arms, a head. But the proportions were all wrong. The arms were too long, hanging down past the knees. The skin. God, the skin was bark. Rough, grey, peeling birch bark that had fused with the flesh underneath. It was dragging itself because its legs didn't bend at the knees. They were stiff, like tree trunks. It had to haul its weight forward with its arms. Slap. A hand made of twisted vines hit the floor. Drag. The stiff, bark-covered legs scraped over the hardwood. It was moving toward the kitchen. I watched, terrified to blink. What was it doing? Was it hunting? It stopped near the entrance to the kitchen. It raised its head and sniffed the air. I saw its face then. It was smooth. No eyes. No nose. Just a smooth, wooden surface where a face should be. But then, a slit opened in the center. A vertical slit, like a seed pod splitting open. A sound came out. It wasn't a growl. It wasn't a scream. It was a mimicry. "Honey," it said. I almost dropped the skillet. The voice was perfect. It was a woman's voice. Soft. Questioning. "Honey, are you in there?" It was Mrs. Miller's voice. The woman I'd watched die on the sidewalk 6 hours ago. The thing tilted its head, listening to its own sound. Then it tried again. "Help me. It burns. Honey." It wasn't speaking. It was replaying. It was a parrot, repeating the last vibrations it had absorbed before the transformation took hold. I pressed my hand over my mouth to stop the whimper building in my throat. The creature, the Miller thing, seemed satisfied with the sound. It continued its drag into the kitchen. I heard the refrigerator door open, the suction seal popping. Then, the sound of glass jars breaking. It was eating. Or gathering. I needed to see what it was doing. I needed to know if it was going to come upstairs. I took a step down. The 4th step. Creak. The sound was agonizingly loud. The house settled, and the staircase amplified it like a violin body. The noise in the kitchen stopped instantly. Silence. Then, a fast, scuttling sound. Not the dragging anymore. This was different. Faster. The Miller thing shot out of the kitchen backwards, moving on all fours like a spider. It scuttled into the center of the living room and froze. The vertical slit on its face opened wider. The wood split with a wet tearing sound. It didn't have eyes, but I felt it seeing me. I felt the attention of it. It was like standing in front of a radar dish. It raised one of those long, vine-wrapped arms and pointed a finger at me. "Don't touch the grass," it said, using my voice. It was mocking me. It was using the last thing I'd yelled at Mrs. Miller. "Don't touch the grass. Don't touch the grass." It started to vibrate. The bark on its shoulders began to flake off, and underneath I saw pods. Small, yellow pustules embedded in the wood flesh. They were swelling. It was going to release spores. "No," I whispered. I didn't think. I reacted. I threw the cast-iron skillet. It was a terrible throw. I'm not an athlete. I'm a guy who draws buildings. But the skillet was heavy, and gravity did the rest. It sailed over the railing, tumbling through the air. Clang. It hit the creature right in the chest. Or where the chest would be. The sound was dull, like hitting a bag of wet mulch. The creature didn't grunt or scream. It just absorbed the impact. The skillet didn't bounce off. It embedded. The vines on the creature's chest instantly coiled around the handle, pulling the iron into itself. But the impact knocked it off balance. It stumbled back, its stiff legs tangling. I turned and ran. I scrambled back up the stairs on my hands and feet, slipping on the carpet. Behind me, I heard a sound that I will never forget. It was the sound of blooming. Pop, 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 pop. The pods were bursting. I reached the landing and dived into my bedroom. I slammed the door. I locked it. I threw my weight against it. "Tape!" I yelled at myself. "Tape, you idiot!" I grabbed the roll of duct tape from the floor. My hands were shaking so violently I couldn't find the end of the roll. Scritch-scratch. Something was at the door. It wasn't banging. It was touching the wood, exploring it. I found the tape end. I ripped a strip off with my teeth. I slapped it over the keyhole. I ripped another piece. The bottom gap. Tap, tap. Open, the voice said from the other side of the door. It was Mrs. Miller again. It's so hot out here. Open. Go away. I screamed. You're dead. You're dead. Open, it repeated, monotone. Open. Grow. Open. Grow. I taped the entire frame. Layer after layer. I used the whole roll. I didn't stop until the door was a silver rectangle of adhesive. Then I backed away to the window. The tapping stopped. But then I heard a soft hissing sound. I looked at the door. Yellow dust was puffing out from the edges of the tape. The pressure. The creature was releasing so many spores in the hallway that it was creating a pressurized cloud. It was trying to force the particulate matter into the room. I grabbed a towel from the bathroom floor, damp, smelling of mildew, and jammed it against the bottom of the door. I piled pillows on top of it. I retreated to the bathroom, the furthest point. I shut that door too. I sat in the dry bathtub, curled into a ball. I waited for the door to burst open. I waited for the wood thing to come in and turn me into a garden. But it didn't. After about 20 minutes, the scratching stopped. The floorboards creaked as the weight moved away. It went back downstairs. I didn't sleep. Obviously. I spent the next 6 hours sitting in the bathtub, holding a toothbrush, a sharpened toothbrush. I'd ground the handle against the porcelain of the sink until it was a shiv. It was pathetic, but it was all I had. I listened to the house change. The structural groans got louder. At one point, around 4 a.m., I heard a massive crack from the attic, followed by the sound of shingles sliding off the roof. The vegetation outside was crushing the roof. The A-frame design, meant to shed snow, was actually helping shed the vines, but the weight was too much. The trusses were failing. When the light finally started to change, it wasn't sunrise. It was just a shifting of the gloom. The bathroom had a skylight. I looked up. It was covered in green, but I could see light filtering through the leaves. I had to move. I couldn't stay in the bedroom. If the roof collapsed, I'd be crushed. If the thing downstairs came back, I was trapped. I needed to get higher. Or lower. No, definitely higher. The ground floor was lost. The basement was a tomb. The attic. There was a pull-down hatch in the hallway ceiling, just outside my bedroom door. But that meant going back into the hallway. I stood up. My legs were stiff. I was thirsty. My mouth tasted like copper and sugar. I opened the bathroom door. The bedroom was hazy. The spores had gotten in, despite the tape. A fine layer of yellow dust coated the duvet cover. I pulled my shirt up over my nose and mouth. I walked to the bedroom door. The tape was peeling. The adhesive had been dissolved by something. The silver backing was bubbling, melting into a grey goo. Acid, I thought. The spores are acidic. I put my ear to the wood. Silence. I unlocked the door. It stuck. The wood had swollen from the humidity. I had to shoulder it. Thud. It gave way. I stepped into the hallway. It was a greenhouse. Overnight, just 6 or 7 hours, the hallway had been transformed. The carpet was gone, consumed by the blue moss. Ferns were growing out of the light fixtures. The air was hot, wet, and smelled like a compost heap. I looked at the spot where the Miller thing had been. There was a patch of blackened, scorched wood on the floor, and a trail of slime leading back to the stairs. It was gone. I looked up at the ceiling. The attic hatch. It was about 8 feet up. I needed a ladder, but the ladder was in the garage. I looked at the furniture. There was a small console table at the end of the hall. I grabbed it. The wood felt soft, spongy. I dragged it under the hatch. I climbed up. I'm 6'1", so I could just reach the cord. I pulled. The hatch springs groaned, rusted tight. "Come on," I gritted out. I pulled harder. The hatch flew open. A cloud of dust came down. Grey dust, thank God. Just old insulation and dust bunnies. No yellow mist. A metal ladder slid down. I scrambled up it, pulling myself into the dark, sweltering heat of the attic. I pulled the ladder up behind me and slammed the hatch shut. Darkness. Absolute darkness. I fumbled for my phone. I turned on the flashlight. The battery was at 1%. The beam cut through the gloom. The attic was... okay. It was dusty. Hot as hell. But it was dry. The insulation was pink fiberglass, not green moss. The roof, though. I shined the light up at the rafters. They were bowing, visibly bending under the weight from outside. Vines had punched through the plywood sheathing in a dozen places, hanging down like green stalactites. But they weren't moving fast. The heat up here, it must have been 130 degrees, seemed to be slowing them down. Heat, I thought. Fire helps. My note. The plants didn't like the extreme heat of the enclosed attic. I sat down on a pile of old insulation. I turned off the phone to save the last 1%. I was safe for now, but I was trapped in the highest point of a sinking ship, and then I realized something. The air up here. It was thinner. Hotter, yes, but cleaner. The heavy yellow pollen had settled in the lower floors. Up here, I could breathe without tasting sugar. I took a deep breath. It scorched my lungs, but it felt good. I crawled over to the gable vent at the front of the house. It was a triangular vent with wooden slats. I peered through the slats. I could see the street. The sun was up, but it looked like a dying star behind the haze. The street was a canyon. The trees had grown together, forming a canopy that blocked out most of the sky. The houses were just mounds. But down there, in the gloom of the street level, there were things moving. Dozens of them. Some looked like the Miller thing, hollowed-out people made of bark and vine. Others were different. Some were just masses of rolling tumbleweed that moved against the wind. Some looked like dogs made of thorns. Thump, thump, thump. I held my breath until my lungs burned. The footsteps were heavy, deliberate. Whoever, or whatever, was on the roof wasn't growing out of the shingles. They were walking on them. I stared up at the exposed plywood sheathing between the rafters. The heat in the attic was stifling, a dry, dusty oven that smelled of old fiberglass and baked pine resin. But despite the temperature, a cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. "Hello," I whispered. It was barely audible. The footsteps stopped, right above the chimney breast. I scrambled backward, crab-walking over the joists, keeping my eyes glued to the ceiling. If it was one of them, one of the mimics, it could rip through that plywood like wet cardboard. Then came a new sound. Z-z-z-z-z-z-z-z-z-t. A mechanical whine. High-pitched. Drilling. My heart hammered against my ribs. A power tool. That was a saw. A reciprocating saw. Dust began to rain down in a straight line between two rafters. The blade of a saw punched through the wood, gleaming silver in the gloom of the attic. It vibrated violently, chewing through the shingles, the tar paper, and the plywood in seconds. Zzzzzt. Zzzzzt. It was cutting a square. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Hey! I'm in here." The sawing didn't stop. It just got faster. The person up there was in a hurry. I stood up, gripping my sharpened toothbrush like it was Excalibur. I don't know what I expected to do with it against a person with a power saw, but it was all I had. The saw finished the fourth cut. A square of the roof, about 2 feet wide, dropped inward. It hit the attic floor with a heavy thud, kicking up a cloud of pink insulation dust. A shaft of light, that sickly, jaundiced yellow sunlight, pierced the darkness. It was blinding. I squinted, throwing a hand up to shield my eyes. A pair of legs dropped through the hole. Heavy, black boots with thick treads. Cargo pants reinforced with Kevlar patches. Then a torso. The figure landed in a crouch, perfectly balanced on the narrow ceiling joists. It wasn't a monster. It was a soldier. Or maybe a spaceman. They were wearing a full-face respirator, one of those high-end industrial ones with dual filters. A helmet with a flashlight mounted on the side. A heavy, fire-retardant jacket that looked like it had been dragged through a swamp. It was stained green and brown, slashed in places, and patched with duct tape. The figure stood up, scanning the attic with the flashlight beam. The light hit me. I froze, raising my hands. "Don't shoot. I'm human. I'm human." The figure didn't lower the light. They stepped toward me, walking along the joist with the casual confidence of a tightrope walker. "Turn around," a voice said. It was muffled by the mask, synthesized and metallic, but definitely female. "What?" "Turn around. Lift your shirt. Now." She held something in her right hand. Not a gun. A flare gun. Orange, plastic, and pointed right at my chest. I turned around slowly, lifting the back of my sweat-soaked t-shirt. "Spine looks clear," she muttered. "Cough." What? Cough, damn it. Hard. I coughed. It was a dry, hacking rasp. The dust in the attic was thick. "Sounds wet," she said, stepping closer. "But not bubbly. Turn back around." I faced her. She lowered the flare gun, but didn't holster it. She reached up and tapped the side of her helmet. "You're lucky, pal. Most people in the valley are fertilizer by now. How long have you been up here?" Since the stairs turned into a jungle," I stammered. "Who are you? Is the army here?" She laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound behind the mask. "The army? Buddy, the army burned the bridge at the gorge 6 hours ago. They aren't coming. They're containing." She looked around the attic, shining her light on the bowing rafters. "Structure is compromised," she said, more to herself than me. "The load-bearing walls are buckling. This A-frame is going to fold in on itself in about 10 minutes. 10 minutes. My stomach dropped. Maybe 5. The root systems are accelerating. The heatwave is acting like a catalyst. Look." She pointed to the corner of the attic, where the roof met the floor. I hadn't noticed it in the dark, but a vine, thick as my thigh and pulsing with a dark purple vein, was squeezing through the soffit vent. As I watched, it expanded, cracking the wood with a sound like a pistol shot. "We need to go," she said. "Name's Sarah. Wildland Fire. Or what's left of it?" "Elias," I said. "Elias Vance." "Okay, Elias. Can you climb?" I think so." "Good." Because we're not going down. The ground floor is a kill zone. We're going roof to roof." She turned back to the hole she'd cut. Suddenly, the floor beneath us lurched. It wasn't a vibration. It was a drop. The entire house shifted 3 inches to the right. I stumbled, falling onto my knees on the scratchy insulation. From below us, from the hallway I had just escaped, came a sound that made my blood turn to ice. It was a choir. Not one voice. Dozens. Elias. 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 They were all overlapping. Men, women, children. It sounded like a crowded room at a party, but everyone was whispering my name. Sarah froze. She looked down at the attic hatch, the one I had closed. "Did you seal that?" she snapped. I closed it. Is it locked? It's a pull-down ladder. It doesn't lock. The hatch rattled. Thump. Something pushed against it from below. "Come down," the voices whispered. "The water is sweet. The roots are deep. Come down." Sarah racked the slide on the flare gun. "Move. Now. Up the hole." "But—" "Geo!" she screamed. I scrambled toward the shaft of sunlight. I grabbed the edges of the plywood. The shingles tore at my hands, hot and rough. I pulled myself up. Behind me, the attic hatch exploded. It didn't just open. It shattered. Splinters of wood flew everywhere. I looked down one last time. A fountain of green erupted into the attic. It wasn't just vines. It was faces. Dozens of those wooden, hollow faces, fused together into a rolling mass of vegetation. They were pushing each other out of the way, climbing over one another like crabs in a bucket. And in the center of the mass was the Miller thing. It was bigger now. It had absorbed the furniture. A coffee table was embedded in its side. Its arms were 10 feet long, lashing out like whips. It looked up at Sarah. "Fire," it hissed. "Bad. Fire. Bad." Sarah didn't hesitate. She aimed the flare gun at the mass and pulled the trigger. Phum. The red magnesium flare hit the creature dead center. It screamed. A high, piercing shriek that sounded like steam escaping a boiler. The dry insulation in the attic caught instantly. The pink fiberglass melted, and the wooden joists burst into flame. "Grab my hand," Sarah yelled. She was right below me. She jumped, grabbing the edge of the roof cut. I grabbed her wrist. She was heavy, all that gear, but the adrenaline gave me strength I didn't know I had. I hauled her up. She got a boot on the rafter and vaulted out onto the roof beside me. We rolled onto the hot shingles. Below us, the attic was an inferno. The fire was spreading fast, eating the dry timber of the roof. Smoke, black and oily, billowed out of the hole. "Don't stop." Sarah grabbed my shirt and yanked me to my feet. "The smoke will signal every spore tower in a mile radius." We were on the peak of the A-frame. I looked out at the valley, and my knees almost gave out. When I had looked out the window earlier, I had seen my street, my neighborhood. From the roof, I could see everything. The valley was gone. It was a sea of green, a rolling, undulating ocean of canopy that stretched from one mountain range to the other. The town center was just a suggestion of geometric shapes under the vines. The church steeple was a green spire. The high school football stadium was a bowl of massive, writhing ferns. And rising out of this green sea were the towers. Massive, bulbous growths, like giant pitcher plants, towering hundreds of feet into the air. They pulsed rhythmically, puffing out clouds of that yellow dust. They looked like smokestacks for a biological factory. "My God," I whispered. "It's all gone." "Not all of it," Sarah said, pointing north. "The High Line." I followed her finger. About 2 miles away, cutting across the valley floor, were the high-voltage transmission towers, the big metal skeletons that carried power from the hydroelectric dam. They were steel. The plants couldn't eat steel. Not yet. The towers stood above the canopy, a line of grey sentinels marching up the side of the mountain, toward the treeline where the air was too thin for the spores. "That's the exit," Sarah said. "We follow the power lines up the mountain. Above 6,000 feet, the air pressure drops and the cold kills the pollen. That's the safe zone. 2 miles." I looked at the devastation between us and the nearest tower. "We have to cross that?" "We stay high," Sarah said. "Roof to roof. Tree bridges. If we touch the ground, we die. Simple as that." The roof beneath us groaned. A massive, structural failure. The fire in the attic had burned through the supports. "Jump!" Sarah yelled. She took a running start down the slope of the roof. My neighbor's house, the Gables place, was about 8 feet away. The roof was lower. I didn't think. I just ran. My boots slipped on the hot granules of the shingles. I pushed off the edge of the gutter just as the A-frame collapsed behind me. I was in the air. For a second, I was flying over the alleyway between the houses. I looked down. The alley was a pit of thorns. Black, serrated spikes waiting like a tiger trap. I hit the Gables roof hard. I rolled, the impact knocking the wind out of me. I slid down the slope, scrabbling for a grip. My fingers tore against the sandpaper texture of the roofing. I stopped with my feet dangling over the edge. A vine shot up from the gutter, wrapping around my ankle. "Help!" I screamed, kicking at it. Sarah was there in a second. She had a machete. I hadn't even seen her draw it. Whack! She severed the vine. It retracted, leaking purple sap that hissed where it touched the roof. She grabbed my collar and hauled me up to the ridge line. We lay there for a moment, gasping for breath. The heat radiating off the black roof was intense. Behind us, my grandfather's cabin, my renovation project, my escape, was gone. It had folded inward, swallowed by the fire and the crushing weight of the Miller thing. The smoke column rose straight up into the still, yellow air. "Good news," Sarah said, checking a gauge on her wrist. "The fire is creating an updraft. It's pulling the spores up and away from us for a few minutes." She sat up and looked at me. Her mask lenses reflected the burning house. "You got a name for those things?" I asked, pointing at the wreckage. "Mimics," she said. "Or gardeners. Doesn't matter what you call them. They just want to plant you." She reached into a pouch on her vest and pulled out a spare mask. It was smaller, a half-face respirator, not the full helmet she wore. "Put this on." "My spare. Filters are at 50%, but it's better than breathing raw pollen." I took it. My hands were shaking. I strapped it to my face, pulling the rubber straps tight until they dug into my skin. I took a breath. The air tasted like charcoal, but the sweet rot was gone. "Thank you," I said. "Don't thank me yet. We have to get to that tower." She pointed to the first transmission pylon, rising out of the green sea about 4 blocks away. "And the sun is going down in 2 hours." "What happens when the sun goes down?" I asked, though I already knew. Sarah looked at me, dead serious. "Photosynthesis stops," she said. "They stop growing. And they start hunting." She stood up, balancing on the ridge of the roof. Let's move, architect. Unless you want to stay here and become a potted plant. I stood up. My legs felt like jelly, but the mask gave me a strange sense of security, a barrier between me and the world. We started to run along the rooftops, two tiny figures skipping across the surface of a green ocean, while the sun dipped lower, turning the yellow sky into a bruised, bloody red. As we jumped to the next house, I heard it again. The singing. It wasn't coming from the house anymore. It was coming from everywhere. The whole valley was humming, a low, resonant vibration that I could feel in my teeth. They know we're here, I thought. The whole forest knows we're here. And as we landed on the flat roof of the neighborhood convenience store, I saw them, gathering at the base of the building. Dogs. But not dogs. They were wolves made of briar patch, thorns for fur, wood for bone. They were circling the building, looking up at us with empty, not whole eyes. Sarah stopped. She pulled the flare gun again. She only had 2 shells left on her bandolier. "New plan," she said, her voice tight. "We don't go to the tower." "What?" I grabbed her arm. "You said the tower was the exit. Look at the base of the tower, Elias." I looked. The metal legs of the transmission tower were swarming. Thousands of them. Small, beetle-like creatures made of pine cones and bark were crawling up the steel lattice. They were building a bridge. A living ramp. "They're cutting off the high ground," Sarah said. "So where do we go?" I asked, panic rising in my throat again. She turned and pointed toward the center of town, toward the only thing that wasn't green. The hospital. It was a modern building, glass and steel, hermetically sealed. And on the roof, barely visible through the haze, was a helicopter. "The medevac," she said. "If it still has fuel. If the pilots are still alive." "It's in the middle of the deepest growth," I argued. "That's suicide. Staying here is suicide," she countered. "Moving to the mountains is suicide. That chopper is the only wild card on the table." She looked at me. "Can you fly a helicopter?" I laughed. A hysterical, short bark of a laugh. "I draw houses, Sarah. I don't fly choppers." "Well," she said, checking her machete, "I hope you're a quick learner, because I can't fly one either." She turned and sprinted toward the edge of the roof. "Keep up." I looked at the briar wolves pacing below. I looked at the burning remains of my house. I looked at the hospital rising like a tombstone in the distance. I took a deep breath of filtered air and ran. The sun didn't set. It dissolved. 1 minute, the sky was that bruised, hemophilic red. The next, the shadows stretched out from the base of the buildings, joining hands, and the world went grey. Then black. And then it started to glow. I was crouching behind an AC unit on the roof of a dry cleaner's, trying to catch my breath through the rubber seal of Sarah's spare mask. The air inside the mask tasted like recycled rubber and fear. "Look," Sarah whispered. She was prone next to me, her rifle, an old bolt-action hunting rifle she must have scavenged, trained on the edge of the roof. I looked over the parapet. The valley wasn't dark. It was luminous. As the photosynthesis stopped, a chemical reaction triggered in the flora. The blue moss that I'd seen in my hallway, that was everywhere now. It coated the streets, the cars, the sides of the buildings in a soft, pulsating azure light. But it wasn't just blue. There were veins of angry, radioactive orange running through the larger vines. The spore towers, those massive pitcher plants rising above the canopy, were glowing with a deep, internal violet light. It looked like we were stranded on the bottom of the ocean. It was breathtakingly beautiful. And then the singing changed. During the day, it had been a hum, a background vibration. Now, in the cool of the night, it sharpened. It became a trill, a high-pitched, staccato chittering. Click, click, whir. Click, click, whir. "They're communicating," Sarah said, adjusting the strap on her helmet. "The root systems share chemical signals during the day. At night, they use sound, echolocation, like bats." I asked. "Like submarines," she corrected. "They're pinging the environment, mapping it." She looked at me, her eyes reflecting the blue glow of the street below. "If we make a sound, a real sound like a dropped tool or a scream, they'll triangulate us instantly. So, Elias, do not scream." "I'll try my best," I said, gripping my sharpened toothbrush. It felt even more ridiculous now. "Where do we go?" "The street is a river of that blue stuff. We cross the canyon," she pointed. Between our row of low commercial buildings and the hospital district lay Main Street. It was 4 lanes wide. The canopy over it had collapsed in places, creating a jagged trench of vegetation. "How?" I looked at the gap. It was 60 feet across. "We can't jump that." "We don't jump," Sarah said. "We use the crane." I followed her gaze. A construction crane, one of those big tower cranes from the new condo development, had toppled over. It had smashed into the side of a bank building on our side and bridged the gap, its boom resting on the roof of the parking garage across the street. The crane was covered in vines, of course, thick, ropey creepers that spiraled around the yellow steel latticework. "It's a bridge," Sarah said. "A very narrow, very slippery bridge." "It's covered in them," I hissed. "We'll be walking right on top of the plants." "Those are dormant," she said, sounding hopeful. "Ironwood vines. They harden at night to protect the core. Just don't step on the flowers." "Why? What do the flowers do?" She didn't answer. She just stood up, keeping low, and moved toward the edge of the roof where the crane's counterweight had smashed through the brick parapet. I followed. My legs felt heavy. Every step on the gravel roof sounded like a gunshot to my ears, even though I knew it was quiet. We reached the base of the crane. The steel was cold. I put my hand on a girder to steady myself. The vines wrapped around it were hard as stone, cold and slick with condensation. "I'll go first," Sarah said. "Keep 3 paces behind me. Watch where I step. If I stop, you stop. If I fall, you run back. Do not try to save me. You'll just fall too." "I'm not leaving you," I said. She turned back, her face unreadable behind the mask. "That's sweet, architect. But dead is dead. Move." She stepped out onto the lattice. We were 60 feet up. Below us, the blue glow of the moss illuminated the wreckage of Main Street. I could see cars crushed flat like aluminum cans. I could see bodies, lumps in the moss, cocooned in silk-like webbing. I stepped onto the crane. The metal groaned. Not a loud sound, just a shift in tension. Click, click, whir. The sound from below got louder. I focused on Sarah's boots. Left foot, right foot. Avoid the yellow flower. Step on the steel. Left foot, right foot. We were halfway across. The wind picked up, swaying the crane boom slightly. The motion made my stomach turn. I looked down. Mistake. Directly below us, prowling through the bioluminescent moss, were 3 of those briar-wolves. The thorn hounds. They were hideous. They didn't have fur. They had needles. Their bodies were skeletal, made of twisted root wood, but they moved with a fluid, liquid grace. Their eyes were just knots in the wood that glowed with a faint red heat. One of them stopped. It raised its head. It sniffed. Then it let out a sound. Not a howl. A rattle. Like dry bones shaking in a bag. Rattle, clack, clack. Sarah stopped. She held up a fist. The hound below leaped. It didn't jump like a dog. It launched itself. It cleared 10 feet of vertical distance, scrabbling up the side of the bank building we had just left. Its claws, thorns the size of steak knives, dug into the brickwork. It was climbing, and it was fast. "Move," Sarah whispered. "Pick up the pace." We hurried. I slipped on a patch of wet moss, my shin banging against a steel crossbar. Clang. The sound rang out like a bell. The hound on the wall froze. Its head snapped toward us. The red knot eyes flared. It let out a shriek, a sound like tearing metal, and scrambled faster. It reached the roof we had just vacated. "Run!" Sarah yelled, abandoning stealth. She sprinted along the narrow beam of the crane. I scrambled after her, my hands gripping the cold, wet vines for balance. The hound reached the base of the crane. It didn't hesitate. It leaped onto the lattice. It was faster than us. Much faster. "It's coming!" I shouted. Sarah reached the end of the crane, the tip of the boom resting on the parking garage roof. She leaped off, landing on the concrete. She spun around, raising the rifle. "Jump, Elias!" I was 10 feet away. The hound was 20 feet behind me, a blur of thorns and hate. I could hear its claws clicking on the steel. I lunged for the gap. My foot caught on a vine. I fell forward, my chest hitting the concrete lip of the parking garage roof. The breath left my lungs in a whoosh. My legs dangled over the edge, 60 feet above the glowing street. I scrambled, clawing at the concrete. The hound was on me. It didn't bite. It stabbed. A paw, a cluster of sharpened roots, slammed down right where my head had been a second ago. I jerked aside, and the thorns sparked against the concrete. Sarah fired. Crack. The shot was deafening in the silence. The bullet hit the hound in the shoulder. Wood chips exploded. The impact knocked it sideways, off balance. It flailed, its claws screeching on the metal of the crane. It fell. I watched it tumble, silent, into the blue abyss below. It didn't scream. It just vanished into the moss. "Get up!" Sarah grabbed my jacket and hauled me onto the roof. "There are 2 more down there." We ran across the top level of the parking garage. This was the hospital garage. We were close. We reached the stairwell door. Sarah kicked it open. We stumbled into the stairwell. It was dark, smelling of stale urine and something else. Spores. "Wait," I gasped, leaning against the wall. "Wait." My mask. The seal had broken when I hit the concrete. I pressed it back against my face, hyperventilating. "Take a breath," Sarah said, checking the magazine of her rifle. "You good?" I think I bruised a rib. But I'm good. I looked at her. Her suit was torn at the shoulder. "You're hit," I said. She glanced at the tear. "Just a scratch from the roof edge. Suit's compromised, though. I've got maybe 30 minutes of clean air before the filters clog." 30 minutes to find a helicopter," I said. "Great." We moved down the stairs. The plan was to cross the sky bridge on the 3rd floor that connected the garage to the main hospital building. The helipad was on the roof of the main building. We reached the 3rd floor landing. The door to the sky bridge had a glass window. I looked through it. "Oh no," I whispered. The sky bridge was beautiful and deadly. It was a glass tunnel suspended over the street. But the glass had broken weeks ago. The interior was a hanging garden. Long, weeping tendrils of bioluminescent vines hung from the ceiling, brushing the floor. They were glowing with a soft, hypnotic pink light. And standing in the middle of the bridge, perfectly still, were people. Sleepers. There were maybe 20 of them. Doctors in scrubs. Patients in gowns. Visitors. They were standing upright, wrapped in fine, translucent silk. Their eyes were open, staring at nothing. Vines were plugged into their mouths, their ears, their tear ducts. They weren't moving, but they were breathing. I could see the condensation on the inside of the silk. "The nursery," Sarah said softly. "They keep them alive. To incubate the seeds." "We have to walk through that?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Unless you want to go down to the street with the hounds," she said. She pushed the door open. The air in the bridge was warm and humid. It smelled like opium, sickly sweet and heavy. "Don't touch them," Sarah whispered. "Don't wake them up." We stepped onto the tiled floor. The vines hanging from the ceiling twitched as we passed, sensing our body heat. I ducked under a loop of pink light. I passed a woman in a nurse's uniform. Her face was serene, almost happy. A green shoot was growing out of her left eye socket, blooming into a small white flower. I tried not to look. I tried to focus on the door at the other end. We were halfway across when I heard it. A heartbeat. Not mine. Not Sarah's. It was coming from the floor. Thump, thump. Thump, thump. The floor tiles were cracked, and in the cracks a red liquid was pulsing. Sap. Or blood. "Sarah," I whispered. "The floor." She looked down. "Move. Faster." I took a step. My boot squeaked on the tile. The nurse, the one with the flower in her eye, turned her head. It was a slow, creaking motion, neck vertebrae popping. She looked right at me. Her mouth didn't open. The vine plugged into it pulsed. "Doctor," a voice said. It wasn't her voice. It was coming from the ceiling vines. They were vibrating, creating the sound. "Doctor. Page. Lobby." Then another sleeper turned. A man in a suit. "Meeting at 5." They were waking up. The network was waking them up. "Run!" Sarah shoved me. We bolted for the door. Behind us, the sleepers started to scream. But not in fear. They were screaming an alarm. A high, continuous wail that sounded like a tea kettle. "Intruder! Biomass! Intruder!" We hit the double doors at the end of the bridge. Locked. "Kick it!" Sarah yelled. We both slammed into the doors. The magnetic lock groaned, sparks flying from the keypad. The sleepers were moving now, pulling their feet out of the roots, stumbling toward us, their silk cocoons tearing. Again! We hit the door. Crack! It flew open. We tumbled into the hospital corridor. Sarah spun around and slammed the doors shut. She jammed the barrel of her rifle through the handles. Faces pressed against the glass. The sleepers. They clawed at the window, leaving smears of green slime. "Join," they moaned. "Join the garden." "Let's go," Sarah said, backing away. Stairs. Roof. Now. We ran. The hospital was dark. illuminated only by the emergency lights and the invasive moss. We found the stairwell. Up 4 flights. My lungs were burning. The bruise on my rib felt like a knife. We hit the roof access door. It was heavy steel. I pushed the panic bar. It opened into the night air. The wind hit us. It was cold and fierce. And there it was. The helipad. A red H painted on the concrete. And sitting right in the middle. The medevac helicopter. It was a Bell 407. Red and white. "It's there!" I shouted, a wave of relief washing over me so strong I almost collapsed. "It's actually there!" But Sarah didn't cheer. She stopped, grabbing my arm. "Look closer, Elias." I squinted through the gloom. The helicopter wasn't just sitting there. It was anchored. Thick, woody vines, as big as tree trunks, had grown up over the side of the building. They were wrapped around the landing skids. They were wrapped around the tail boom. They were holding the helicopter down like a prisoner. And the cockpit. The glass was intact. But inside was a glow. A deep, pulsating purple light. Something was living inside the helicopter. "Well," Sarah said, racking the bolt of her rifle, "I guess we have to evict the pilot." "How?" I asked, staring at the monstrosity. "How do we fight that?" Sarah reached into her pack. She pulled out a small, red canister. "Propane," she said, "from the hardware store. And a road flare." She looked at me. "You're the architect, Elias. If I blow the skids, will the structure hold?" I looked at the helicopter. I looked at the tension in the vines. "If you blow the skids," I said, my mind racing, "the tension will snap the vines. It might flip the chopper." "Then you better start the engine before I blow it," she said. "Me? You're the pilot, remember? I said I wasn't a pilot. Figure it out." She shoved the propane tank into my hands. "I'll draw its attention. You get in that cockpit. You clear the vines. You turn the key." She stepped away from me, walking toward the nose of the helicopter. "Hey!" she shouted at the purple glow. "Hey, ugly! Room service." The thing inside the cockpit moved. A face pressed against the glass. It wasn't human. It was a giant, blooming flower with teeth. And then, from the edges of the roof, the hounds began to climb over the railing. 1, 2, 5. We were surrounded. "Go!" Sarah screamed. I ran for the pilot's door. I didn't think about the hounds. I didn't think about Sarah. I didn't think about the fact that I was an architect whose only experience with flight was a simulator game I played once in college. I just ran at the red door of the helicopter. The cockpit glass was fogged with condensation on the inside, glowing with that pulsating purple light. A vine, thick as a python, was wrapped around the door handle. I grabbed it. It was warm. It pulsed under my grip like a carotid artery. I pulled. The vine tightened. It didn't want to let go. "Open!" I screamed, slamming my shoulder into the metal. Behind me, I heard a gunshot. Crack. Then a snarl. Sarah was buying me seconds, paying for them in bullets she didn't have. I braced my foot against the landing skid, which was bolted to the roof by the roots, and pulled with everything I had. Squelch. The vine tore. A spray of hot, viscous purple sap hit me in the face. It burned like acid. I wiped my eyes, gasping, and yanked the handle down. The door swung open. The smell hit me harder than the sap. It was the smell of a slaughterhouse mixed with a florist shop. copper and gardenias. And there was the pilot. It wasn't a man. It wasn't even a mimic. It was a tumor. A massive, bulbous growth had erupted from the pilot's seat. It had consumed the original pilot. I could see a scrap of a flight suit embedded in the biomass, and expanded to fill the space. It had tendrils woven into the instrument panel, fused with the dials, the switches, the stick. It turned toward me. It didn't have a face. It had a flower. A giant, wet, yellow orchid where a head should be. The petals peeled back, revealing rows of translucent, needle-like thorns. It hissed, a sound like a punctured tire. It lashed out with a tendril, whipping it toward my neck. I ducked. The vine slapped the door frame, leaving a dent in the aluminum. I looked around the cockpit. Weapon. I need a weapon. There, clamped to the floor between the seats. A red cylinder. A fire extinguisher. I dived for it. The pilot thing screamed, a high, electronic feedback noise. It knew what I was doing. It tried to grab my arm with a vine that was wrapped around the collective lever. I grabbed the extinguisher. I ripped it from the bracket. I swung it like a club. Thud. I hit the flower face dead center. Pollen exploded everywhere, yellow dust filling the small cabin. I choked, swinging again, and again. Thud. Squish. The biomass gave way. It was soft, pulpy. I was smashing a pumpkin. I didn't stop until the flower was a ruin of green sludge. "Get out!" I yelled, grabbing the mass with my hands, my bare hands, God help me, and hauling it out of the seat. It was heavy, wet, and stuck to the upholstery. I tore it loose. Wires sparked where the vines disconnected from the instrument panel. I threw the bulk of it out the open door onto the roof. I jumped into the seat. It was slick with sap. I looked at the controls. Panic. Pure, white-hot panic. There were 1,000 switches, dials, gauges, screens, and half of them were covered in sticky green residue. Elias! Sarah screamed from outside. "Start it! Start the damn thing!" I looked out the windscreen. Sarah was backed up against the nose of the chopper. She was swinging her rifle like a bat now. 3 hounds were circling her, their thorn claws clicking on the concrete. "Okay," I hyperventilated. "Okay. Start. Start." I looked at the ceiling panel. Switches. Battery master. I flipped it. The dashboard lit up. Bzzzzzzzzzzz. The purple glow of the alien bioluminescence was replaced by the harsh, amber glow of electric lights. Warning lights. All of them. Low rotor. Engine out. Hydraulic press. A master caution alarm started blaring. Whoop whoop. Whoop whoop. Shut up. I yelled at the machine. I looked for the key. There was a key. It was bent, but it was in the ignition. I turned it. Nothing. Fuel, I muttered. Fuel pump. I scanned the switches. Fuel pump FWD. Fuel pump aft. I flipped them both. I heard a hum. A mechanical hum. "Come on," I whispered. I grabbed the collective, the lever by my left hand. It was sticky. There was a twist grip on it. The throttle. I twisted it to idle. I pressed the starter button on the stick. Whine. The sound was pathetic at first. A slow, grinding turnover. Whine, whine, whine. Then a whoosh. Ignition. The turbine caught. The sound jumped from a whine to a roar. The helicopter shook. It vibrated so hard my teeth rattled. Above me, the main rotor blades began to turn. Whump, whump, whump. They were hitting the vines that were draped over the fuselage. Whump crack, whump snap. The blades were chopping through the vegetation. Green debris rained down on the windshield. "It's running!" I screamed. "Get in!" Sarah didn't move. She was kneeling by the landing skid on the right side. She was jamming the propane tank into the cluster of roots holding us down. "Not yet," she yelled. "Get the RPMs up. Full throttle." I twisted the grip. The turbine screamed. The rotor speed increased. The vibration became violent. The helicopter wanted to fly, but the roots were holding it down. We were straining against the leash. The metal of the skids groaned. "Sarah!" One of the hounds lunged at her. She didn't look. She rolled backward, under the fuselage. The hound slammed into the side of the chopper, denting the panel right below my feet. Sarah scrambled up on the other side, the pilot's side. She grabbed the door frame. Her face was pale, streaked with soot and green blood. "When I shoot," she yelled over the roar of the engine, "you pull that stick back. You pull it back and you don't stop. You'll kill us. Do it." She leaned out, hanging off the step with one hand, aiming the flare gun under the belly of the helicopter, toward the propane tank on the other side. "See you in hell, you wooden bastards." She pulled the trigger. Boom. The world turned white. The explosion wasn't massive. It was a small tank, but it was directed. It blew the right skid clean off the roots. The helicopter lurched violently to the left. We were tipping over. The rotor blades dipped toward the concrete roof. "Pull up!" Sarah screamed, pulling herself into the cockpit. I grabbed the cyclic, the stick between my legs, and yanked it back and to the right. The hydraulics hissed. The swash plate tilted. The rotor blades bit into the air. With a sickening tear, the remaining roots on the left skid snapped. We didn't fly. We popped into the air like a cork from a bottle. The stomach-dropping sensation of lift hit me. We shot up 20 feet, spinning wildly. The tail rotor, I hadn't touched the pedals, was fighting the torque. We spun in a circle. I saw the roof. The hounds were scattering. The burning wreckage of the roots where the propane had gone off. Then I saw the edge of the building. We were drifting sideways, toward the drop. "Pedals!" Sarah yelled, throwing herself into the co-pilot seat. "Push the right pedal." I stomped on the right pedal. The spinning stopped with a jerk that slammed my head against the door glass. We leveled out. We were hovering, 50 feet above the hospital roof. The warning horn was still blaring. Whoop whoop. "We're up," I gasped. "We're up. Go." Sarah pointed forward. "Don't hover. We're a sitting duck for the spores." I pushed the stick forward. The nose dipped. The helicopter surged ahead. We cleared the edge of the hospital, and suddenly the ground fell away. We were over the city. The view! God, the view! It was a bioluminescent ocean. The blue moss covered everything, glowing softly in the dark. The orange veins pulsed like lava flows through the streets, and rising out of the mist were the spore towers, massive purple lighthouses that swayed gently in the wind. We flew right past one. I saw the pores on the side of the tower open. A cloud of yellow dust puffed out, caught in our rotor wash. "Windows!" I yelled. "Close the windows!" Sarah slammed her door shut. I reached over and pulled mine closed. The silence was sudden and heavy, broken only by the muffled roar of the turbine and the thumping of my heart. I looked at the altimeter. 500 feet. Higher, Sarah said, her voice sounding tinny through the headset she had just put on. Get us to 2000. Above the pollen layer. I pulled up on the collective. The engine whined in protest, the needle on the temperature gauge spiking into the yellow. Easy, Sarah warned. Don't cook the engine. We climbed. 600 feet. 800 feet. 1,000 feet. The city became a map below us. A map of a lost world. I could see the fires burning in the suburbs. My house, probably. A pinprick of orange in a sea of blue. I could see the interstate. It was a river of vines. Cars were just bumps in the road. And to the west, the reservoir. The water was black, reflecting the stars. And around the edges of the water, thousands of tiny lights were moving. What is that? I asked, pointing. Sarah adjusted her headset. She looked tired, exhausted. The migration, she said. They're going to the water, to seed. We kept climbing. The air in the cockpit was recycling, the filter scrubbing out the smell of the dead pilot thing. At 2,000 feet, the air cleared. The yellow haze thinned out, replaced by the crisp, clear night sky. The moon was full, hanging there like it didn't care that the world below had ended. I leveled off. My hands were gripping the stick so hard my fingers were locked in claws. I had to consciously force them to relax. We made it, I whispered. I looked over at Sarah. She was slumped in the co-pilot seat. Her head was leaning back against the headrest. Her eyes were closed. Sarah! She didn't answer. Sarah! I reached over and shook her shoulder. She groaned. Her eyes fluttered open. They were glassy. Still here, she mumbled. Just tired. Check your suit, I said. You said it was compromised. She looked down at her shoulder. The tear in the fabric. It wasn't just torn. There was something growing there. A small, delicate white flower was sprouting from the wound in the Kevlar. And underneath, on her skin, I could see green lines tracing up her neck. Oh, she said softly. She looked at me. A sad, resigned smile. Looks like I got a stowaway. No, I said. No, we're in clean air now. It stops the growth. You said the cold stops the growth. It stops new spores, she said. But once it's in the blood. She reached into her vest and pulled out the flare gun. She opened the breech. Empty. She dropped it on the floor. Where are we going, architect? She asked, changing the subject. You got a flight plan. I looked at the horizon. To the north, the mountains rose up, jagged and dark against the stars. The High Line. The power towers. The dam, I said. The hydroelectric dam. It's concrete. High altitude. Sealed. Good choice, she whispered. Concrete is good. She coughed. It was a wet, rattling cough. Elias. Yeah. Don't land yet. Just keep flying for a bit. I want to see the stars. I looked out at the vast, empty sky. Okay, I said. We'll fly. I adjusted the trim. The helicopter steadied. We beat a rhythmic path through the cold night air, leaving the glowing garden far below. I was flying a stolen helicopter with a dying soldier next to me, heading for a dam that might not even be there. But for the first time in 24 hours, I wasn't being hunted. I looked at the fuel gauge. 1/4 tank. Part 5, I whispered to the windshield. We survived Part 5. The fuel light wasn't flickering anymore. It was solid red. We were at 6,000 feet. The air outside the cockpit had dropped to freezing. The heater in the Bell 407 was broken, probably clogged with vines, so the cabin was an icebox. I looked over at Sarah. She was shivering violently. Her lips were blue, but the flower on her neck, it was dying. The cold, the altitude. It worked. The white petals had turned brown and brittle. The green veins under her skin had stopped pulsing. They looked like old bruises now. The infection hadn't vanished, but it had gone dormant, frozen in its tracks. "Sarah," I said, my voice rattling in the headset. "Look." It stopped. She opened her eyes. They were clear. The glassy look was gone. "Cold," she whispered. "It's so cold." "That's good," I said, forcing a smile I didn't feel. "Cold is good. Cold means we win." I looked ahead. The moon illuminated the mountains like jagged teeth, and there, nestled between two peaks, was a massive grey curve. The dam. It was a fortress of concrete, holding back a frozen black lake. No trees, no green, just rock, snow, and the brutalist architecture of human engineering. "There it is," I said. "The Highline Dam. We made it." Sputter. The engine coughed. A violent yaw kicked the tail of the helicopter sideways. "Fuel starvation," I said, my stomach dropping. "We're dry." "Auto-rotation," Sarah mumbled. Her training kicked in even through the hypothermia. "Drop the collective. Preserve RPM." I slammed the collective lever down. The engine whined and died. The sudden silence was deafening. No roar, no vibration, just the whoosh 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 of the blades spinning from their own momentum. We were a falling brick with a parachute made of metal. "Hang on," I gritted out. I aimed for the top of the dam, a wide, flat concrete roadway that ran across the spillway. The ground rushed up fast. Too fast. "Pull," Sarah whispered. I pulled back on the stick at 50 feet. The helicopter flared, nose up, bleeding off speed. The blades roared one last time as they bit into the freezing air. We hit. Crunch. The landing skids collapsed instantly. The belly of the chopper slammed into the concrete. We slid. Sparks, bright, angry orange showers, erupted past the windows as metal ground against stone. The tail boom struck a light pole and sheared off. We spun, screeching, sliding toward the edge of the dam wall, a 400-foot drop into the spillway. I stomped on the brakes that didn't exist. Stop! Stop! We hit the guardrail. Bang! The glass shattered. The cockpit crumpled inward. And then silence. Just the wind. The high, thin wind of the mountains. I hung in my harness, staring down through the broken nose of the chopper. The guardrail had held. Barely. We were dangling over the abyss. "Sarah!" I rasped. I turned my head. The co-pilot side had taken the impact of the light pole. The door was crushed. Sarah was slumped forward. The harness was the only thing holding her up. "Sarah!" I fumbled with my buckle. My fingers were numb. I popped it loose and fell onto the dash. I scrambled over the console, ignoring the pain in my ribs. I reached for her neck to check for a pulse. Her skin was ice-cold, but there was a pulse. Faint, thread-like. "I got you," I said, tears freezing on my cheeks. "I got you." I kicked the pilot's door open. It fell off its hinges and clattered onto the concrete. I dragged her out. It took everything I had. I pulled her onto the cold, hard road of the dam. I looked around. It was desolate. It was grey. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. There was no green. Not a single blade of grass. The air was thin and sharp and smelled of snow and ozone. I looked at Sarah. The flower on her neck had withered completely. It fell off, turning to dust in the wind. She took a breath. A ragged, hitching breath. "Did we?" She whispered, her eyes not opening. "We made it," I said, holding her hand. "We're at the dam. It's safe. Nothing grows here." She squeezed my hand. Weakly. "Good," she breathed. "Good job. Pilot." Her grip went slack. I sat there for a long time. Just me, the wind, and the body of the soldier who had saved my life. I didn't bury her. The ground was too hard. I carried her to the control room of the dam, a bunker-like building with thick steel doors. I laid her on a cot in the break room. I covered her with a wool blanket I found in a locker. I locked the door. She deserved to rest in the quiet. That was 3 months ago. I'm still here. The dam is fully automated. The turbines are still spinning deep inside the concrete, generating power for a dead grid. But I have lights. I have heat. I have the vending machines in the cafeteria and a stockpile of emergency rations I found in the maintenance shed. I go out every morning to the edge of the dam and look down at the valley. It's still green down there. A toxic, glowing jungle. I can see the spore towers pulsing, sending yellow clouds drifting toward the mountains. But they can't reach me. The altitude is a wall they can't climb. I've been working on the radio. The dam has a powerful transmitter for communicating with the grid authority. I figured out how to boost the signal. I'm broadcasting on a loop. AM frequency. Shortwave. Everything I can reach. If you are listening to this, if you can hear my voice, do not go to the cities. Do not go to the valleys. Look for the snow. Look for the high ground. The cold is the cure. My name is Elias Vance. I am at the Highline Dam. I have power. I have food. And I have clean air. I am alone. But I am alive. And if you can make it up the mountain, I'll leave the light on for you.